Welcome to your Deep Dive listener. Today we're diving into the world of early signs of autism.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. We've got this article, 7 Early Signs of Autism Every Parent Should Know.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, it's not from like a super scientific journal or anything,
Sure.
but it's got some really interesting points that I'm curious to unpack with you if you're games.
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, cool. So what really struck me about this article is just how much it emphasizes early identification. They really hammer home how crucial that is for getting the right support in place for these kids.
Oh, for sure. I mean, early intervention is it's really the cornerstone of making sure that children with autism have the best possible outcomes, right?
Totally. So they list 7 signs, and the first one is delayed language development. And I know at first glance you're probably like, well, duh, isn't it kind of obvious
Yeah.
if a kid's not talking? But the article points out that it's not always like complete silence, right?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's way more nuanced than that.
Okay.
A child might hit those early milestones, start saying a few words, and then it's like things just sort of plateau.
Interesting.
Or they might use language in ways that seem, I don't know, a little unusual to most people.
It's so true. And that actually reminds me of this friend I have, her son. He would just echo phrases from his favorite cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
like almost word for word.
Wow.
It was like he was acting out a script or something instead of actually having a conversation.
Yeah. That's a great example of echolalia, it's actually pretty common in autism.
Mm.
And it's really fascinating, because it gives us a little glimpse into how the autistic brain processes language, often very literally.
Wow.
And this whole literal thinking thing, that connects directly to another sign this article mentions, which is difficulty understanding figurative language.
Oh, that makes so much sense, though.
Yeah.
Because if you're thinking literally, idioms like, spill the beans or piece of cake must sound like a totally foreign language, right?
Precisely. I mean, imagine navigating a world where people are constantly saying things that they don't literally mean.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it just highlights how important clear and direct communication is when you're interacting with someone on the spectrum.
Absolutely. So we've got these potential language delays. We've got challenges with figurative language. It seems like it's all kind of pointing to some pretty fundamental differences in communication.
Yeah, for sure. And, those differences in communication, they can really impact a child's social interactions, too.
Of course.
Which brings us to the next sign that the article highlights, which is social challenges.
Right. And I think this is one where people often have a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about being shy or introverted.
No, not at all. No, it goes much, much deeper than that. We're talking about difficulty understanding those unspoken social cues.
Oh, right.
Things like facial expressions, tone of voice. Oh, wow, yeah.
Even knowing when to make eye contact.
Right.
Or how to take turns in a conversation.
It's like, all those things we kind of take for granted.
Exactly.
We don't even realize we're doing it.
Right. They're subtle, often unconscious.
Yeah.
But these are the aspects of social interaction that can be really, really challenging for someone with autism.
So it's almost like those fundamental building blocks of social interaction are just, wired a bit differently.
Yeah, exactly. And this can show up in a variety of ways.
Right.
Some children might seem withdrawn, wanting to play alone,
Sure.
avoiding interaction. Others might, they might crave that social contact,
Okay.
but struggle to understand boundaries, maybe standing too close,
Yeah.
or interrupting constantly, things like that.
And this is where, I imagine that early intervention piece becomes even more critical, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because those social skills are just so essential throughout life. Yeah. Early intervention can give those children the tools and strategies they need to navigate the social world more effectively.
For sure.
And one area where early intervention can be particularly helpful is addressing another really common sign.
Okay.
And that's repetitive behaviors.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
This is a big one that people often, associate with autism.
Yeah.
The article mentions things like, flapping hands, rocking back and forth, or lining up toys, that kind of thing.
Yes, and while these behaviors might seem, unusual or strange to those of us who are not on the spectrum, they actually serve a really important purpose for individuals with autism.
Oh, interesting. In what way?
Well, I mean, imagine experiencing the world with this heightened sensory sensitivity. Everything feels louder, brighter, more intense.
Wow. Yeah.
These repetitive behaviors, they're often a way for individuals with autism to self-regulate,
Interesting.
to find a sense of calm amidst all that sensory input.
Wow. I never even thought about it like that.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about like trying to stop these behaviors entirely, but more about understanding
Right.
like why they're happening.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
maybe finding, alternative ways to help the individual self-regulate if those behaviors become disruptive or,
Yeah,
whatever.
got it. It's all about providing support and understanding.
Yeah, I love that. Support and understanding, that's beautiful. And speaking of support, let's talk about the next sign on the list, which is sensory sensitivities.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this one really hits home because I've seen it firsthand with people I know,
Yeah.
This article mentions both hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. So being either overly sensitive or not sensitive enough
Yeah.
to things. And it could be anything, right? Sounds, textures, lights, even smells.
Absolutely.
And it's not always obvious to the people around them, which I think is also really interesting.
Right.
I have a friend whose son, I mean, he just completely melts down whenever they're in like a grocery store with those flickering fluorescent lights. It's actually heartbreaking to watch. It's really tough.
That's a perfect example of how sensory sensitivities can manifest,
Yeah.
For individuals with autism, it's all about how their brain processes that sensory input. And sometimes that processing can be, well, it can be quite different. It's
Yeah.
like their internal volume knob is either stuck on high or it's incredibly low, making everyday experiences just feel completely overwhelming.
Wow.
Or conversely, difficult to even register at all.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, the five senses we typically think of, right?
Yeah.
Sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing.
Right.
There's more to it than that.
You're exactly right. There's a whole world of sensory processing happening that we often don't even think about.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, take the proprioceptive system, for instance. Proprioceptive, it governs our body awareness, our sense of where we are in space.
Okay, I've vaguely heard of that. So how would that come into play for someone with autism?
Well, a child with proprioceptive sensitivities might crave deep pressure.
Deep pressure, okay.
Think weighted blankets, tight hugs, even squeezing into small spaces.
Oh, wow.
Or they might be constantly on the move, crashing into things, jumping, bumping.
Huh.
Almost like they need that intense sensory input to feel grounded.
It's like their body is telling them, I need more information.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, you have someone with vestibular sensitivities, which relates to balance and movement.
Yeah.
They might be overly sensitive to things like swings, spinning, even just going up and down stairs.
Wow, that is fascinating. It really makes you realize how much we just take for granted in terms of how our bodies process the world around us.
Absolutely. And the more we understand about these sensory differences, the better equipped we are to create environments that are supportive and accessible for everyone,
Totally.
regardless of where they fall on the spectrum.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening so far, and we're just getting started. We've got a lot more to unpack about this article. So before we took a little break there, we were talking about sensory sensitivities and how, I don't know, they can be so different for everyone. Really makes you think, right?
It really does. And, it highlights how important it is to meet people where they're at,
Yeah.
to create environments that are actually sensitive to those sensory differences.
Absolutely, yeah. So this article also mentions something called limited range of interests as a potential sign. And I got to say, this one feels, I don't know, kind of tricky to me, because like we all have our passions and things we're into, right?
Right. We all have things we gravitate toward. But when we talk about autism, it often comes down to like the intensity and focus of those interests. You know what I mean? It's not just like a casual hobby. It becomes like this all-consuming thing.
So that's like those interests, they almost become like the center of their world in a way.
In a way, yeah. And it's not necessarily a bad thing at all, right? I mean, these deep dives into specific topics, they can lead to like incredible knowledge and expertise.
So instead of seeing it as a limitation, maybe we should be like looking at it as a strength.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing those passions and nurturing them,
Yeah.
It can be like a pathway to building confidence, finding a sense of purpose, even connecting with others who share those deep interests.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I think sometimes, like as a society, we tend to try to fit everyone into the same like box of what's considered normal, right?
Yeah.
Instead of like celebrating those unique passions and interests that people have.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, embracing neurodiversity means like truly recognizing that there's no one right way for a brain to be wired or to think or learn or, engage with the world.
Well said, yeah. Now, there's one more sign on this list that I definitely wanted to dive into a little bit because um, it's something that, I've been seeing more and more about just kind of in general. And that's this idea that autism often presents differently in girls.
Right.
In fact, the article even mentions that, girls are often like diagnosed later than boys. So what's up with that? Why is that?
Yeah, no, that's a really critical issue that I think deserves a lot more attention, you know. Because for a long time, our understanding of autism was largely based on observations of boys.
So it's almost like the very lens through which we're viewing autism, might have had this like built-in bias from the beginning.
Exactly. And because of that, girls were often like overlooked or even like misdiagnosed,
Wow.
sometimes for years. And it's not that they weren't on the spectrum, it's just that their experience might have looked really different.
So what are some of the ways that autism might manifest differently in girls then?
Well, one thing is that girls are often very, very skilled at what's known as like masking.
Masking, okay.
Yeah, they learn to observe and mimic social behaviors,
Huh.
even if those behaviors don't like come naturally to them.
So it's like this like social chameleon act
Yeah.
almost. It's like they're putting on a performance every day just to navigate like the social world.
Exactly, exactly. And while it might seem like a helpful coping mechanism on the surface,
Right.
it can actually come at a huge cost.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Imagine like constantly suppressing your true self,
Right. Wow.
trying to fit in. I mean, it's incredibly exhausting and emotionally draining.
It breaks my heart to think of these girls, struggling in silence, feeling like they have to hide, this fundamental part of who they are.
Yeah, and it's a real problem, and it often leads to girls being diagnosed, much later, like I was saying, sometimes not until adolescence or even adulthood.
Which again just highlights how crucial it is for everyone, parents, educators, healthcare professionals, to really be aware of these different presentations.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. We need to move away from this idea of like a typical presentation and be much more attuned to these subtle signs, especially in girls.
So what can we do? What are like some of the keys to earlier identification and support, especially when it comes to girls? It's so easy to get, I don't know, kind of caught up in like the clinical aspects of all this.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like we're talking about real people
Absolutely.
with their own unique strengths and challenges.
100%. Yeah. And that's where I think this whole concept of neurodiversity is just so important, Just recognizing that honestly, there's no one right way for a brain to be wired.
So true. And when we talk about supporting girls with autism, I mean early identification, that's just the first step, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the other ways we can create a more inclusive and supportive environment for these girls?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to like truly listen to autistic girls and women themselves. They are the experts on their own experiences.
So often, it's like the voices of marginalized groups, they just get, I don't know, like spoken over, dismissed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's crucial to like amplify those voices, to really listen and learn from their perspectives.
100%. And, I always tell people, like, seek out autistic creators, writers, advocates. I mean, there are just incredible voices out there sharing their stories, their insights, just their unique perspective on the world. It's so valuable.
And it's not just about listening, right?
Yeah.
It's about believing them, trusting that they know their own experiences best.
Exactly. And beyond listening, I think we need to create spaces where autistic girls and women feel safe, accepted, and valued for who they are.
Right.
That means challenging our own biases, being open to different ways of communicating and interacting and just like celebrating neurodiversity in all its forms.
It's about creating a world where everyone, feels empowered to just like embrace their authentic selves.
Yes.
Regardless of where they fall on the spectrum.
Absolutely. That's a world I think we can all get behind, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, I actually wanted to circle back to something we touched on a bit earlier, which is early intervention.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in practice,
Yeah, so it's really about, providing tailored support based on the individual child's needs, right? So some like Common approaches that you might see include speech therapy, occupational therapy, social skills training. There's also something called applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, which focuses on like understanding and modifying behaviors.
I've heard that, ABA can be like really effective, but I'll admit I don't really fully understand like how it actually works.
So it's actually pretty interesting. ABA therapists, they kind of break down these complex skills into smaller, more manageable steps. And then they'll use like positive reinforcement techniques to encourage learning and progress. And it can be incredibly helpful, honestly, for teaching everything from like basic communication skills to like daily living
It's
activities.
just all about like, empowering individuals with autism to thrive in a world that, honestly, like wasn't necessarily designed with their needs in mind in the first place, right?
Exactly. And early intervention is just, it's so key because
Mm.
the younger a child is, the more malleable their brain is, meaning they're, just much more likely to benefit from these interventions.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening, and I feel like honestly we've only just scratched the surface. But we are unfortunately just about out of time.
It's been a pleasure, as always, diving into this topic with you.
Likewise, likewise. And listener, we want to hear from you. Which of these early signs resonated most with you? Head over to our website address, and share your thoughts. We've also got a ton of additional resources linked there, including, some amazing organizations doing such important work in the autism community. So until next time, keep those minds curious.